I feel pretty stupid on a regular basis. It always seems like I don't have a clue what's going on, and it turns out that pretty often and if you've clicked on this video, then you probably feel the same way. Today we're diving into a subject which I think could change how you look at new skills and tasks forever. We're talking about the 4 stages of learning. What they are, why being clueless is a good sign, and how understanding these stages can turn you from a bumbling beginner to an expert. My name is Lewis Seal, a second year vet student at Cambridge, and if I can understand what the hell is going on here, then you can too. Understanding these stages helps you set realistic expectations. It can help you avoid reaching that block where you find yourself becoming frustrated and help turn that frustration into motivation. I saw a lovely phrase that says something like, it's a lot less painful to know your own limitations than it is to not know they exist at all. Essentially, realising that you won't immediately be good at something, and that it's not after 4 weeks of learning that you suddenly understand everything that's going on, and actually it might feel like after you started something you'll feel like you're worse at it. These are all very natural and almost counterintuitive things that happen, but as long as you can understand them, then hopefully you'll just feel like less of a mug in the whole process. Okay, let's break down the 4 stages of learning. We have to realise that learning, first of all, is not a case of going from not knowing something to knowing it. It's just a series of steps of gradually increasing your competence in your field or your area. And said stages of learning can be put into these categories. So the first stage is unconscious incompetence. This is when you're blissfully unaware of what you don't know. It's like when you start baking and you don't know the difference between flour and sugar. You don't recognise the pitfalls and mistakes in your own approach, and therefore you can't necessarily improve upon them. If you see my video on the Dunning-Kruger effect, then this will all sound very familiar, as part of learning is learning what you don't know. You'll realise regardless that just working away at something mindlessly won't get you very far at all. This is why people put things like revision timetables on such pedestals. It's because rather than just blindly going in and revising whatever you feel like, you actually have some sort of system in place that means that you can tackle the course systematically and work out, well, I've covered this and I've covered this, but I don't know this part of the course. And that's a very important skill to have. Like we said, if you've never cooked before, there's no point just chucking a load of ingredients together and hoping for the best. And if that is where you are, then you, my friend, are in the unconscious incompetent stage. Next, we have conscious incompetence. This is the stage when you start to recognise your own limitations and can realise what is good and what is bad. Maybe in the example of the cake, you're halfway through cooking and realise you've forgotten a key ingredient, and suddenly your cake starts to taste of cardboard and regret. Congratulations though, you've reached the I have no clue what I'm doing phase. The characteristics of this phase is that you start to recognise your own gaps in knowledge. You realise that baking a cake isn't just chucking stuff in a bowl and hoping for the best, but actually it's a science or a very precise art. So I'm told. Realising you're not as good as you think you are is actually a very key stage in learning. I only recognised this very late, and it became quite apparent that as soon as I knew that I didn't know stuff, I'd stop putting up barriers to my own learning, because I wouldn't be like cocky and think, oh, I don't need to cover that, I already know this. You actually can look at a system quite holistically and work out what you do and don't know. Big Neil deGrasse put a brilliant line, I seem to think, on his masterclass ad. One of the greatest challenges in this world is being smart enough to think you're right, but not smart enough to know you're wrong. And I think that kind of quite well summarises stage 2, the conscious incompetent stage. You can see why, even as early as stage 2, you can make some quite notable improvement. Even though you're still quite trash at what you do, there is a clear roadmap forward, and now you can actually work out what to do and what to study to be better. I reckon I'm probably at this stage with my videos, for example. I recognise now they're pretty meaty and I can see why they're crap, whereas before maybe I couldn't even identify why they're bad, I just thought they were okay. Hence the term conscious incompetence. At stage 3 you've got the skills, but you still need to follow instructions closely and carefully in order to do it right. The not so casual phase that we're in here is conscious competence. The stage is well documented in learning literature stuff, both directly and indirectly, such as David Kolb's experiential theory, which essentially states that the only way to kind of progress out of this is just kind of expose yourself to as much experience as possible and by taking part in active learning. The other thing he says is to kind of start conceptualising abstract concepts in your field or your hobby, whatever you're trying to do, because this is then something that will take you from being a very objective learner, someone who can start understanding higher order concepts. It's only a slight shift to go from stage 2 to 3. To me, it seems that there are two key differences, one of which is the ease of input and the second is the quality of output. And really, in order to improve both of those, like Kolb says, the only way to do so is to just do it more and more, which is quite depressing, or it can also be quite liberating depending on how you want to look at it. To me, it seems quite positive that the only thing that's blocking me from getting better at something is by just doing it loads and loads and loads. So to continue with the cake analogy, maybe this is like being able to bake a cake very well and it's very nice and it tastes better than maybe you had in stage 2, but you still have to follow the recipe like it's a sacred scroll. But you're getting there, it is getting there. The final stage is mastery for all intents and purposes. This is when you don't need to think about doing what you're doing and yet still being great at it. Maybe this takes you 10,000 hours, or maybe you never achieve it. You can see why it would be very difficult to achieve this level of ability. At this stage, being great at your skill is second nature to you. You're competent unconsciously. It's in the name, pretty much. Understandably, educational psychology reviews kind of looks at this and says that this is the point where you can start being more creative and break the mould, as it were. By being your own level of competence and not relying on other people to help you, you can start being more flexible and creative with what you do and kind of experimenting a bit more. Maybe you even start to become a leader in what you do and can help others achieve what they want to do because you're that good that you can support other learners. I started originally by saying that these are not 4 binary stages in a process of learning. Actually, they start to seamlessly blend into each other. There isn't naturally a day where you suddenly realise you can cook a cake perfectly and you didn't look at the recipe once. It's a gradual transition, and more on that later. I mean, ironically, this analogy I've been using throughout the cake, personally, my cooking's abysmal. I'm hoping this year, being in the new room, very, very snazzy new room, that I can actually work on my cooking and don't have to rely on Mackies and pot noodles quite so much. But in an ideal world, I'll get to a point of cooking and making dinner so much that actually I can just buy a load of recipes or a load of ingredients and suddenly I can knock something up without having to kind of read a website time and time again and follow it religiously when I'm making dinner. Or one can only dream, at least. So let's explore some strategies as to how we can apply these stages of learning. And the first is by measuring your processes and not your outcomes. See frustration as a sign that you're beginning to know what you don't know. You're recognising the pitfalls in your learning. And that's a good thing. I mean, you're not here to create a masterpiece on your very first time. The many failed cakes it may take aren't pointless stages, that's necessary stages in order to reach that level of mastery that you want. We also so often expect things in life to be like a series of outcomes, a series of events, but that's so rarely the case. Like, for example, if you're studying languages, it's possible to see how you fit in language learning into the 4 stages of learning, but naturally they won't be a clear progression from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. You don't go from one day not knowing the language at all and you don't know that you don't know it, and then suddenly you wake up one day and you're fluent. You can't even complete language learning, as it were, because there's so many words to learn. In fact, what will happen is you'll gradually learn more and more and more and more, and you'll become aware. You'll reach stage 2 and you'll be consciously incompetent. And then you'll reach stage 3 and you realise that more and more, while there are still times you don't know what you don't know, you are actually at a point where you can start to formulate sentences, but you have to think quite actively until eventually you'll be relatively fluent that you don't have to think when you speak in another language. But even so, while you have reached stage 4, that's not necessarily mastery because there's still so many more words to learn. Like with so many things, it's just a case of steadily building up over time until eventually you realise that you're just in a less crap place than you were originally. It might be quite depressing to think that every time you start a new task, you're back to stage 1 or square 1, but that's not the case, particularly if you look at it with a skill stack approach and consider that maybe learning is actually building upon previous skills you've already got. Skills overlap a lot more than you might think, and so even if you have something you're studying that feels completely unrelated to another skill that you've got, try and find where they do align and work out what you can take from skill 1 to help you with skill 2. The third tip is to embrace iterative learning, to realise that Learning is not a linear series of events, but rather a series of iterations. Each attempt is an opportunity to refine your skills, to tweak your knowledge. Maybe you have to unlearn one thing that you discovered to be wrong in order to learn the correct thing that you know is now right. I've had that so many times where I've learned a flashcard and I've done it time and time again. It's become ingrained in my memory, and then someone says it's wrong and I'm thinking, well, no, I know it's from the flashcard. And then you find it, you look at the lecture notes, you search up, and you realise that the flashcard you'd actually written was wrong. And suddenly you have to change that flashcard, you have to unlearn what you've learned so that you can make room for the correct information instead. The final tip would be to leverage feedback loops. There's nothing more beneficial than being able to hear from other people what they think you should do and take advice from a number of different sources so you can get a whole view of your subject ability. Whether it's taste testing the cakes with your friends or doing a mini mock exam with some mates, seeking feedback can accelerate your learning. It's very easy when you look at learning as this series of iterative attempts that will make you gradually better and better, and you'll kind of understand what you do and don't know, that you can start to find it difficult to evaluate your own ability. And so being able to capitalise on feedback from other people means that you can refine what you're doing and work out where you do need to improve, where maybe you're blind to it yourself. A number of sources have shown that constructive criticism can be used to drive growth, and as soppy as it sounds, maybe a little bit of help from your friends can actually go a long way. But all of these takeaways are completely pointless if you don't follow through with the process. Realising you're trash at what you do is actually probably a great sign. I mean, I realise I'm trash at these videos that I make, and yet I think I'm still better than when I started. Right? If you feel like you're an idiot, then you're probably on the right track.